This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. If you've ever admired a beautiful painting or sat in awe after watching an amazing performance, you know the power that creativity has. And maybe a question forms in your mind. Something like, how did this all come together? Sometimes after reading a really good book, I definitely start to wonder about the author's creative process. How did the inspiration strike? How many drafts were written and edited and tossed in the trash before finalizing the book I now hold in my hands? Did the author write this book at their desk, in a cafe? Does the author write in the early morning or at midnight? Or did the author do everything they could to avoid writing at any point? The creative process is something most of us are familiar with, even if you're not an artist. It's both personal and universal at the same time. And creativity is not a skill that a select few innovative geniuses have. Our next guest today believes creativity is something that can be cultivated over time and can be applied to a myriad different kinds of projects, not just the ones you think of as traditionally creative. Joining us now is Zorana Ivcevic Pringle. She's a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and also author of The Creativity Choice, the science of making decisions to turn ideas into action. Zorana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm super excited to turn those ideas into action, which is this conversation today. And you've talked about how you're someone who is actually interested in creativity, but not necessarily creative yourself in the traditional way we think about what creativity means. Is that how you got interested in studying the science behind creativity?
Oh, how I got interested is a story of once upon a time when I was an undergraduate student looking for a thesis topic, and I was not quite sure what I wanted to do. I was very sure I wanted to study interesting people, really engaging people, but of course that's not a scientific term, so you cannot go into scientific journals and look for keywords of interesting people. So I started looking and reading everything I could get my hands off. And finally, I found this one line written by a researcher, Frank Barron, who said that creative individuals are occasionally crazier, yet adamantly saner than the general population. And I was hooked. I wanted to know what that means because I was not quite sure. And I really wanted to study how it could be.
Well, I think it's amazing. Oftentimes you have no idea where you're going to get that spark, like your own experience, where oftentimes it comes from your own question of where do I find the thing? How do I find it? And does it exist? And as someone who doesn't think of herself as naturally creative, how do you weave creativity into the work that you do?
I don't think of myself as naturally creative in the traditional sense of when you hear the word creativity, the first thought is arts. Oftentimes, when I tell people that I study creativity, the first comment is not even arts in general, but oh, that's interesting, but I really cannot draw, so I am not creative. Even getting more specific of like paint and throwing paints against the wall. And it's interesting how we got that idea to begin with. Obviously, the arts are creative, but it doesn't end there. And I am not artistically creative. I cannot draw. I cannot paint. Perhaps I could learn. Certainly, it would be worth trying, but we cannot learn everything we perhaps wish we could just because of lack of time. And so I never invested time in that particular skill, but I ended up realizing and building creativity in different ways, in particular in science and in writing, in asking questions and looking into those questions, in asking them in different ways and finding different approaches how to answer them. And then I became interested in communicating that to the general public and saying, hey, some of the messages, some of the science of creativity does not end up getting out there to help people, to guide them, to tell them, hey, these things that you have are actually not quite right. These things that you have as beliefs are not what science is supporting, and how it could be liberating to know that.
Well, I see so many parallels because we here, of course, we think about this on a daily basis of building on what you're saying. What are some new ways to ask those old questions and how to get outside of that structure or limitation that either we put on ourselves or society put on us? And when you're thinking and writing about creativity, as we have just been talking about, using a wider, an expanded definition that goes beyond the arts, right? When we're talking about creativity, what are some benefits of reframing the idea of creativity, especially in a way that people think of creativity more as a tool and as a skill that you just mentioned that they can access or something that they can invest in?
If we think of creativity as a tool, as a set of skills, as a way of approaching the world, then a whole world opens up. So let's start with a more traditional way of thinking about creativity. That first association that many people have of creativity and the arts. Well, not everybody's artistic. Not everybody has skills that lean them and make it easier to learn the skills in the artistic areas. Not everybody is interested in learning it or in investing time in it. So if we think of it just as artistic, then creativity is open to a relatively small number of people. But if we expand and say creativity can exist in scientific endeavors, in working with technologies, in everyday interactions, in everyday activities, it exists in whatever domain of work we are in. Then it becomes something that is accessible to just about everybody. To give you an example, one of the most inspiring examples of creativity that I have seen in my work and in my consulting was from a supervisor in a food services department of a large teaching hospital. Now, how stereotypical is that? It is not,
Right.
obviously. And the whole process of how it happened with this particular individual was inspiring, and it is showing how we can observe something in our environment, how we can realize there is an opportunity and the need to address something and use that perceived frustration and use that perceived need to say, hey, I can create something original that is going to be effective, that is going to improve work. And he created a completely new system how his workers put food on patients' trays. Workers were happier because it was more streamlined. They did not have to reach far away, and they did not get tired and frustrated. And also, patients benefited because there were fewer mistakes, and food is part of the treatment process.
Well, and actually, based on the example you just gave, which is sort of a non-typical example, is does the act or the process of creativity have to be going towards something that's original? Do you have a North Star definition of creativity that drives your own research here?
There is a very broadly accepted definition of creativity, and it has two parts to it. The first part is originality. For something to be creative, it has to be in some way original. And there are different ways how it can be original. And the second part is effectiveness of some sort. Again, what effective means is different for different contexts. And there, it really helps to look at creativity at different levels, from very personal to the level that changes society and how we live.
And so I think we're kind of dissecting the definition of a word here, but there's so many layers that we can peel back because,
Mhm.
especially now, I mean, I think it's always the case in some ways, but now in the world where we have so many duplicates and artificially generated content, and how much we have and how much exposure we have to to that content, it feels like it takes a lot of work to classify something as creative or original. What are your thoughts about being in the world today where we have so much of that?
I think it really helps to go into those layers of different kinds of originality and different levels of originality. Sometimes I hear from people who, when they hear the word originality, oh, nothing is really original in this world and in this age.
Right.
But that implies a particular view of originality, view that something almost came out of nothing and that has never been conceived in any similar fashion ever in history. Well, we can go very philosophical about that particular definition, and I am not sure what I think of it myself,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not necessarily helpful to view it like that.
Right.
So I love that you mentioned layers of meaning, and it really helps to dissect those. And you're right, also, that we have this proliferation of terms and different words that are used. In psychology, there is a term for that called the jingle jangle fallacy. It's a great
I love
word.
that. That's so good.
So it really helps to really think about it in terms of layers and in terms of levels of creativity. And then the science of creativity, we distinguished four different levels: mini C, little c, pro C or professional creativity, and big C or eminent creativity.
And can you get into those sort of labels a little bit for us? What does it mean to be a part of one of those labels, or maybe all four?
So the first, most basic level is mini C. And this is creativity in the learning process. And it is original in a very limited sense. It is original just for you as an individual. Maybe other people have thought of it, but nobody
Mm-hmm.
taught it to you. And for you, it's the first thing you have ever done something like this. But it is helpful. So it helps you learn something, it helps you make a meaning. Maybe you are learning new material and then you relate it to your personal experience and you make these original connections. So to give you personal example for me, and this is going to date me a little bit, way back, in the 80s, early 90s, when I was in high school, I had to learn these long lists of words in German and
Mm-hmm.
in Latin. And I did not like that. So I invented a strategy how I would do that. So instead of having flashcards, I would record myself on a tape recorder.
Mm-hmm.
And record the word in one language, then record a translation, and then test myself. Probably other people in history have invented that too,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody taught it to me. So it was original in relation to myself.
So, well, I was just gonna say, because of what you just said, I feel like, is it important to acknowledge that because you got there yourself? That's the important thing to recognize, versus, oh, is this original? Like, did someone else already do this? Well, if someone else already did, then it's not cool.
Well, it is cool because it is helping you study these long lists that you really don't want to study,
Exactly.
and it's making it effective. And it is original, but in the sense that it is new to you. There is no need to obsess whether it is original and worth it because nobody else ever done it, because it is helping you in this particular situation. And then the next level of creativity is what we call little c, or little everyday creativity. And saying little is not, again, to belittle it. It is actually a form of creativity that is very closely related to our well-being. So it is really helpful emotionally and in giving purpose to life. And what happens there in little creativity, everyday creativity, is that it is something original we do in the context of our daily lives. Maybe it is an original birthday gift for somebody who we care about. And you can see how that can enrich life for you as you are thinking of it, as you are devising it and creating it, and enriches the life of a person you are going to give it to. The originality here is in, again, limited context, but social context, but context that is not social in the sense of the world, but your relationships and your immediate environment. What is effective about it is, well, that friend really loved it. It made their day. It was something that they ended up talking about. And I have recently had a friend who had a 50th birthday and really spent a lot of time devising that gift, and it became a whole story. And that it's going to become something that we reminisce about and laugh about.
We'll love a good devising.
Oh, good devising. Good devising is fantastic, isn't it?
I know we're throwing out a lot of labels and definitions for our listeners today, but it's based on what you've been talking about. I feel like does it make sense that creativity and being creative can become a habit? And it's something as, like you mentioned, it's something as, quotations around the word simple, but something as simple as thinking about the birthday gift that you really want to make unique for your friend. Or as you're mentioning the gift, I'm thinking decorating the gift bag versus buying a gift bag, for example.
Oh, exactly. The intentionality part is really important. In my personal life, I think my husband is the most creative person I know. He's a scientist. He's an interdisciplinary scientist. But the thing that I find most interesting is what he does in everyday life, of approaching everyday situations with an attitude and oftentimes explicitly asking in these words, how can we do this creatively? And if you do that, instead of, oh, I have to solve this problem, say those words, it starts changing your attitude and opening up your thinking. And you can do this in everyday life, in your everyday situations, but also you can do it in the context of work, which brings us to that next level and probably the most common form of creativity, professional creativity. Things that we do that require a level of expertise, probably things that we do in context of our work, our jobs, something that we spend a lot of time on, sometimes by necessity. And the necessity being the mother of invention is not a silly saying. There is a lot to it. And there we are using our expertise and our knowledge as a starting point to ask questions and to say there could be perhaps a different direction, different approach, or a different problem we can identify and solve.
Well, I love that personal example you use because that resonates with me a lot because my husband's also a scientist. And throughout our relationship, I often remind him that actually you're very creative because back to the limitation of you have to be artistic to be creative, I was like, well, some engineer had to figure out how to build a bridge. You're going to tell me that there's no creativity there? So I know we're going to get into sort of the blending of the creativity relationship with arts and sciences. But as we were talking about the process of developing our our creativity over time, whether it's personal or professional, it feels like this goes beyond just developing a certain skill set, but also developing our ability to innovate, whether it's towards your expertise or to gain that expertise.
Certainly, and there are parts of creativity, what you need to make creativity come to life, that are general processes. Scientists call them general processes, but what
Mm-hmm.
it really means is ways of doing something, ways of approaching your tasks and your projects that are common to whatever you're doing. And then there are some where you use a particular kind of expertise. So if you are an engineer, you are going to use knowledge of engineering,
Mm-hmm.
knowledge of processes in engineering. If you are a social scientist, you are going to use methods that are specific to social sciences sometimes, such as survey methods, for instance, that I use a lot in my work. If you are an architect, and you can just go on and
Mm-hmm.
on
Right.
in what are the specifics of each particular field, but there's a lot in the creative process that is common. It's
Mm-hmm.
we have to generate ideas, we have to find ways to pick those ideas. Along the way, there are going to be hurdles, there are going to be obstacles, pretty much by definition, because if something is in any way original, there is no step by step process that can be outlined because you cannot fully rely on past experience.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's going to diverge from the past experience because of that originality. So, there are some things that are general and some things that are specific.
Well, and before we go to break, I want to come back to what we were talking about earlier at the start of the show. Is you started your journey here with a question, and it sounds like one of the main drivers of creativity is also getting outside of our comfort zones. And you've written a lot about this in different ways, and one of the ways is experiencing new circumstances, like going to a new place or going somewhere stimulating, like an art museum, for example. But another is also encountering a crisis. And we've had a lot of crises in the world in the last couple of years. But at the same time, we've also had a lot of innovation. So there's this idea that our best work comes out of our hardest challenges. I've certainly seen that coming out from deadlines myself. But why is that the case? And what's an example of this?
Uh, this is a great observation that creativity comes from a challenge, because when you have a challenge, um, you need to do something different. The circumstances are different from those that existed before, and therefore you need something new, and that originality becomes possible. So, to give an example that we all lived through recently, the example of the COVID pandemic. There is great research showing that in many parts of the world, not just in the U.S., there was a great wave of innovation coming out of COVID. And what happened there is all at once, we had problems. We had lots of problems. We had problems how to do our work. We had problems how to connect with people. We had problems how to do things that we used to do normally, like go to restaurants that were original ways of usual ways of doing it were not available anymore. So we had to solve it, and they had to be by necessity original. And what happened in COVID that is relatively unusual is that there was a lot of societal support for trying something new because of this universal need. There was support in terms of financial help for people who were out of work, and many people ended up starting small businesses. And that wave of small business foundation has maintained even after that first wave of the pandemic, because you were home, you were temporarily out of work, hopefully temporarily out of work, but there was more time, and support that could get people started. So this whole combination of there's a challenge, there's a need, and there's support is the magic formula for creativity.
And we're going to be talking more about that magic formula after a quick break. With us for the hour is Zorana Ivcevic Pringle. She's a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and also author of The Creativity Choice. And listeners, let us know what kind of creative pursuits are you working on these days. We would love to know. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. A couple of years ago, the Where We Live team got really interested in our chronotypes. This is the body's natural preference for wakefulness and sleep. It also says something about the time of day when you're at your most productive, and our jobs often require a lot of creativity. So that was pretty useful information for us. But as it turns out, day or night, whether you're feeling optimally energized and inspired, or maybe a little low energy, you can still channel your creativity. With us is Zorana Ivcevic Pringle. She's a senior research scientist at Yale and also author of The Creativity Choice. And Zorana, I saw you smiling when when I was talking about if you're creative in a day or if you're creative in the evening. And we're going to jump to talk about how that relates to our process, but also how emotions can be a driver or a block for creativity. What does this look like? And how did you make that first connection between creativity and emotions?
Oh, I was chuckling as you were saying that because I happen to be very much not a morning person.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was starting to write the book, of course, I went online to check advice for effectively writing books. And pretty much it boils down to get up at 5 and write first thing in the morning. I do not reach full consciousness until 10 a.m. so, so that piece of advice was not going to happen for me, and that is okay.
Well, I
I could
really
write.
appreciate you being here right now because it's not quite 10.
Oh, it is fantastic because I also draw energy from interaction with people, and so that compensates for it. But I recognized that this piece of advice, right first thing in the morning, would just not work for me. Certainly, it works for many people, but it also doesn't work for many people. And the important thing is to acknowledge that there isn't one formula.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't only do this, only do these 6 steps, and your way to creativity is going to be guaranteed. Instead, what you should think of is different skills, different strategies that you can pick and choose to suit you particularly. Um, and when you mention chronotype and those ideal for us, for each individual, times of activity and times of feeling alive and fully there, that is related to emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Those times when you are most active, you oftentimes have more energized and positive emotions, and there are particular ways of thinking that are related to those. And then somebody like me, who's not a morning person, in the morning, I tend to be a little downcast, but actually, like, if I'm honest, a little bit grumpy too.
Mm-hmm.
And those kinds of moods are also related to particular kinds of thinking. Now, when you are working on a creative project, there isn't just one kind of thinking that is required for it. There's all kinds of thinking that is important. So those energized moods are really helpful for coming up with ideas, for being playful, for going a little wild and in unusual directions. But those moods that are downcast are really good for critical thinking.
Mm.
They are really good for saying, hey, wait a minute, those wild ideas, some of them were really so wild, they are not going to be useful and they might not work or even be detrimental if I think about it again.
Mm.
So both are needed when we are thinking of the creative process, not just as thinking of ideas, but also doing something with those ideas, evaluating them, choosing them, developing them, working on them to get something that is tangible in the end.
And can you talk about the role that the environment plays in creativity? You know, do emotions in certain environments fuel certain types of creativity? It's funny because we have this in common where neither of us are morning people, yet we're here having this very deep conversation together before we both have reached full consciousness. So I'll just let that be out there for everyone. But it really, I also drive energy from the people around me and from the conversation itself. And so, but I'm also in a very specific environment where it's for that purpose. So can you talk about how does emotions play in certain environments, and how does that fuel sort of certain types of creativity?
So, what we were just talking about is naturally occurring mood. So, in the morning, left to my own devices and with just nothing intervening in it, I am going to be downcast or even sullen. But that's not the only thing that happens, right? In life, we also have intervening things that happen. And we also have agency in relation to our emotions. What that means is that we can do something about it. We can influence their course. I am not naturally high energy first thing in the morning, but I know it is helpful to be excited when you're going into a conversation that opens it to listeners and interaction with somebody. So I know that it would be helpful for me to get in the mood that is a little bit more energetic than my by default mood. And so you can do something about it. You can listen to a piece of music. You can think of personal memories that get you in the mood, that make you smile a little bit, or that make you excited about something. And that way, nudge your mood in a direction that would be more helpful for a particular circumstance.
Well, then you mentioned interaction, and I think we've been talking mostly about this process when you're sort of flying solo. And I know you've written a lot about the social aspects of creativity, actually. So, what do you say to people who think that creativity works best as a solo pursuit versus when you are with a group of people, for example? Because I do find a lot of creativity really happens, like the magic really happens when I'm also surrounded by people who are very engaged in whatever the project it is that we're doing.
Creativity is both. It is at times you need focused work that might happen alone,
Mm-hmm.
but it also benefits from social interaction. And creativity is social, not just in the context of collaboration or teamwork. When we hear the word social, we immediately go there in our minds. And that is true, but it's not limited to it. So, to give an example of writing a book, right? The activity itself is completely solitary. I
Mm-hmm.
was the only one writing that book.
Right.
I was sitting in front of my computer and there was nobody else there doing it with me. However, it is social sometimes in implied ways. The ideas that I have, the ways of thinking about creativity, what I have learned about it, all happened in a social context, from interactions with colleagues, from reading work by others, from creating work with others, pieces of research and scientific knowledge. So that is another form of social influence that happens in the creative process. And we are never doing it alone, even
Mm-hmm.
if the act itself is solitary.
Well, and we've been talking so much about the benefits of creativity, and some are obvious with an end product, like a book, for example, or a bridge that was built. But you also talk about the health benefits of creativity, especially around aging and writing. And you've written that this is the idea that creativity can maximize late life adaptation, including competent functioning. Can you say more about this in the context of the neuroscience behind creativity? Are there connections that are made in the brain when we do something creative that could benefit us later in life?
I am not a neuroscientist. I'm a psychologist by
Mm-hmm.
training. Let's stay with the psychology
Sure,
of creativity
sure.
and what we have learned as benefits. There are lots of benefits in engaging with creativity, and James Kaufman, professor at University of Connecticut, has very extensively studied it and written about it. The most helpful part of creativity or aspect of creativity is what we talked earlier with that everyday creativity or little c creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Those interactions we have with people in our daily lives that we enrich and enliven through little acts of creativity. And we all know about benefits of social interactions for well being at any point in our lives, from preventing loneliness, which is discussed these days in terms of epidemic proportions, to increasing our happiness and our sense of connectedness and belonging and purpose in life. So that little c creativity has a big boost to our well-being in all aspects of our life and in all stages of our life, because social isolation is particularly a problem as we age,
Mm-hmm.
because after retirement in particular, we have less social interaction that is structurally built into our lives through interactions at work, for instance. It becomes even more important in the process of aging.
Well, you just mentioned well-being and the social isolation aspect of this, and earlier you talked about how the COVID pandemic has impacted or influenced some of our creativities, and in the years since the height of the pandemic, I think we've watched a lot of people engaged in creative pursuits. And you mentioned I think the bigger C earlier is people who were able to start their own businesses and whatnots. But I think I want to come back to sort of the little C creatives as well, where people were baking more or writing more or reading more. And it seems like some of this serves as a therapeutic outlet, but some of it might also be a way to sort of process the heavy emotions that we're going through. Are those two different things? What's your take on creativity as therapy or as a coping mechanism?
Creativity certainly can be helpful as a coping mechanism. So there was wonderful research on drawing, for instance, as a tool for managing emotions. In these experiments, people would be put in a particular mood by remembering personal events that were either sad or frustrated or inducing anger, and then be asked to draw something, either something that is not related to the content of their emotional experience, or so it's distracting,
Mm-hmm.
or something that expresses directly the content of that emotional experience. And perhaps counterintuitively for many people, going against that hypothesis of catharsis through facing and directly processing the emotion, distraction, drawing as a means of distraction was actually most beneficial in terms of reducing those unpleasant emotions. And it could be because we don't know exactly why that is, but it could be because in the moment, those emotions could be too big to directly deal with them. And by getting ourselves distracted, we are taking a little bit of that edge off.
Today, we're speaking with Zorana Ivcevic Pringle, who's a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and also the author of The Creativity Choice. And we'll be back with Zorana in a little bit. And let us know if you are harnessing your creativity or if you're scribbling more these days. We want to hear about it. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. When was the last time you did something creative? This hour, we're learning that being creative doesn't mean that you have to be artistic, but being creative does require a bit of innovation. With us is Zorana Ivcevic Pringle. She's a senior research scientist at Yale and also the author of The Creativity Choice. So, Zorana, as someone who writes every day for work and pleasure, we're a team that we're no stranger to writer's block. But I also know that writer's block can be influenced by fear. Creativity requires a certain amount of vulnerability. And sometimes I think we give ourselves that fear maybe and sort of chokes ourselves. So are there ways to manage emotions like fear so that we stay open to wanting to be creative?
Great question. Creativity block is a big topic, and essentially to cope with the creative block and get over it, we need to use everything we have learned about the creative process and how to deal with the frustrations of it. So I have studied creative individuals across different professions and asked them what happens emotionally when you're experiencing a creative block. And oftentimes when you ask questions from people like that, there's diversity of answers. But here there was no diversity. It was all one answer, frustration. And for some people, that frustration was tinged with anxiety, for some with anger, for some with even self-loathing. It was even hard to read some of these answers. And what we can do? Well, there are three things we can do. One is the essential first step. Start with what you are telling yourself. So I mean, let me ask you. You said you are a writer and you sometimes experience creative block as writers do. What do you tell yourself when that happens?
That it won't get done unless I actually do it. And then I go and clean the house really quickly, maybe do the laundry, wash dishes, because all of a sudden everything else has to be done except for putting words onto that blank document. I think there's a little bit of guilt too, right? Where going back to that, well, if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it for you. So it eventually gets done, but man, it is a process. And I know that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. And oftentimes we tell ourselves, oh, you should do it. You should know better. You have done this before and knew that this gets you in trouble, right? There are all of these self-recriminating things we tell ourselves. So when we get stuck, the best place to start is to imagine that this is not happening to us. Imagine this is happening to a friend, somebody who you truly care about. Are you going to tell a friend that they should know better? Chances are you will not. Chances are you will offer them support. And chances are you will offer them some understanding, some kindness. Now, we could extend that kindness to ourselves and say, okay, I know you don't want to do it right now, and I know this is not working well right now, but this is not a sign that you cannot do it at all. And by definition, creative block is something that is a lack of progress that is not based on your ability. So it is going to be temporary, and give yourself some grace.
All right. Noted that be a better cheerleader for yourself because you're a good cheerleader for your friends. And speaking of friends, we got a call coming in from Young, who is joining us from Greenwich. Young, you are on the air.
Hi, Dr. Zorana. I couldn't pronounce your name correctly, so apologies. But I love the today's episode because, I consider myself to be a new in creativity. Recently, as an entrepreneur, I just have multiple new ideas, but sometimes they come to me in the middle of the night when I'm asleep, and they would wake me up, and I'll have to write things down. Or worse is when I'm taking a shower and I'm all wet and I can't grab the phone, and sometimes those ideas would escape. I wonder if there's any hack to kind of schedule these creativity times where they come to me more on a more convenient time. I know that's wishful thinking, but I wonder if there's any tip for that.
Thank you so much for that call, Young. And we love a good shower thought. So we got about a minute and a half here. Zorana, go for it.
So this is a fantastic question. Sometimes you cannot schedule it. So the hack is, there is a hack, and the hack is to have a notepad by your nightstand and next to the shower. But it's also what we have discussed before. You can optimize creativity and increase the chances of that appearing when you need what you need if you match your moods to a particular task, so that you are thinking of new ideas when you happen to be already in high energized positive moods, and review and critically think when you happen to be in those more subdued moods. You can match and mix.
We got a last question here, and I think this question garners an entire show, but we talked about artificial intelligence a little bit earlier. What are your thoughts about that being a role as a part of our creativity processes today?
That is a whole show for sure. And I think that artificial intelligence can be a tool for creativity. It can be a tool, almost something that we can interact with, just like we would interact with another person. And there are benefits of interacting with others and with different kinds of other people at different stages of the creative process. With those who we are not familiar with, who are at the edges of our social networks, when we are coming up with new ideas and looking for new perspectives, perhaps AI fits there the best. The evidence so far seems to suggest that it can help us generate ideas and also riff off of ideas that it generates in our own minds. And at other times, we really need to sit down and interact with those who have the same kinds of skills, who can help us develop an idea we are already committed to.
You've been listening to Zorana Ivcevic Pringle, who's a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and also author of The Creativity Choice, The Science of Making Decisions to Turn Ideas into Action. You can find a link to her book on our website at ctpublic.org/where we live. Thank you so much, Zorana, for being with us today and helping us be more creative, hopefully.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Jean Amatruda. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening. And hopefully get out there and do something creative today.